Well, good morning, everyone, and I want to thank our guests for joining us here today. It's great to be with my friend, Senate President Soucy, Commissioner Pappas, Mayor Hilliard, and Tom Holmes from the town of Conway to share our perspectives on the upcoming coronavirus relief legislation and the need to provide support for our cities, towns, counties, and states to make sure that we're dealing with increased costs and the lost revenue as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to thank all the local and state leaders who are with us here today for the work that they've been doing for our state and for our communities. It has been so important and impactful to make sure that we're addressing this virus head on, that we're supporting our workers, that we're supporting our local services, and making sure that New Hampshire is doing everything it can to protect the lives of Granite Staters and keep people safe. I've been able to speak with a lot of you over the last few months, as well as other community leaders from around our state, to understand what the experience is of being in local, county, and state government, and to help use those conversations to inform the work that we're doing in Washington. We're at an important juncture right now where we see negotiations ongoing over a coronavirus relief package. We have got to get this work done as soon as possible to provide some stability to state, county, and local government and support for our workers and small businesses that continue to feel the economic pain as a result of this pandemic. As a result of COVID-19, we've seen sharply reduced revenues to state, county, and local government. And at the same time, our local governments have been experiencing a tremendous amount of increased cost associated with fighting this pandemic and protecting public health and safety. And those services are as important as they have ever been, especially as we experience such unprecedented times. So anyone who's ever had to balance a budget knows that with less money coming in and more money going out, it doesn't create a sustainable picture for our state and local government, and that's why Congress needs to act. We passed the CARES Act earlier this year, which did provide some critical funding for our states and for cities and towns, but unfortunately there was a 500,000 population cutoff to receive that direct federal aid. So no unit of local government in New Hampshire, no county, no city, no town received that direct federal aid. I think we need to make sure in the next package we lower that threshold so that communities and counties of all sizes receive direct support. We called on that on our leadership back in May to address this inequity, and we ended up passing the HEROES Act in the House on May 15th that would have provided $1.5 billion in direct assistance to New Hampshire communities and counties. Now that was 2.5 months ago. A lot has transpired since then, and I think the picture of the economic pain that our communities are experiencing as a result of COVID-19 has come into focus, as well as the picture around lost revenue. So this week we saw some further details on the Senate proposal, but it simply doesn't include support for local and county government and many of the other resources we need to fight COVID-19. So we've got to make sure that we're coming to a bipartisan solution. That's the only way to get something done in Washington. But unless we have that significant piece for state, county, and local funding, it's going to be a missed opportunity. And we could potentially see as a result widespread layoffs, cuts to critical services, or even increased taxes to make up the difference. So I'm going to continue to talk to our state and local leaders about this issue, about what they're experiencing. And I'm just really grateful that a few of them have taken the time this morning to join us and to share their thoughts. So with that, I'd like to turn things over first to State Senate President Donna Soucy. Senate President Soucy, thanks for joining us here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Congressman Pappas, for having me here today, and most importantly, for always being so accessible and willing to listen and to be informed about the direct needs that we all have. I think this is a time when we all know it's critically important that we have to support state and local governments because we're really the people on the front lines serving constituents during this pandemic. Here in New Hampshire, we have been able to provide some support to communities during this time, but with a predicted budget shortfall of about $400 million, it's clear that we are going to need more support, and it will be critical for us to be able to maintain state services. There's no question that at the state level, and I know certainly at the local level, this issue isn't a partisan issue. Dealing with COVID and making sure that people are safe truly has to be a bipartisan effort. And I hope the same is going to be true in Washington as you negotiate to try to get more funds to us. As you said, the CARES Act did send some funds to the states, so we have been able to send money to cities and towns. But one of the things that was really lacking, I think, was flexibility to provide more direct aid to those communities, those counties that had very specific needs. So if anything, certainly additional revenue will make a huge difference for us here in the state of New Hampshire. But I think the flexibility is really going to be key because no one knows New Hampshire like we do. And I'm glad, Congressman Pappas, that you have been working with leaders, both Republicans and Democrats. I hope you can continue to advocate to make those changes to the current Senate Republican plan so that New Hampshire can get those critical resources and we can direct them in a way that we know is the best fit for New Hampshire. So thank you again for everything, Congressman Pappas. And I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Pappas at this time.
Thank you, Senate President, and thank you, Congressman Pappas, for inviting me. I particularly admire your nonpartisan approach to this issue. And as you probably know, having worked in county government yourself, we are really the front lines during this pandemic. We have nursing homes and county jails and assisted living facilities that we have to support. And nursing homes in particular have been hit hard by the pandemic. I cannot say enough and give more kudos to our healthcare workers who have been forced to work overtime, having to wear very hot and cumbersome protective gear. Many of them can't go home to their families. They're afraid to pass the virus on. We have nurses that are staying in hotels so that they don't pass things on to their family. And it's really heartbreaking to see what the pandemic has done in our nursing homes. So as we look at the Senate package, we in county government are particularly hopeful that the aid formula that is in the House package, which gives direct funding directly to the counties rather than passing it through the state, we hope that that will work out. Like Senator Soucy, we also are concerned about our revenues. We are, of course, depending on our property taxes, not on income taxes, and we have no idea how that's going to work out as the year progresses. So we think that we might have as much as a $13 to $17 million shortfall overall in all of our county budgets. So again, I urge that we provide the funding directly to the counties if that is possible. We need flexibility. And the last thing I wanted to add to the funding issue is we hope that we will be able to use funding to replace lost revenue. And all of us are working hard to figure out what that will be. So thank you, Congressman Pappas, and we hope that we can move on towards recovery and support our economy. And again, keep up the good nonpartisan approach that you apply to all of your decisions.
Well, thanks,
And
Commissioner.
now,
And I just want to say we appreciate what our healthcare workers, our home care, our population in New Hampshire, especially at the county nursing home. They've been asked to go the extra mile, taking extra precautions, and have been there for families who are going through some really tough times. So please, give our thanks to the workforce of Hillsborough County for everything they do.
thank you.
Well, great. Maybe we'll turn things over to Mayor Dana Hilliard from the Hilltop City of Somersworth.
Good morning, Congressman. Always a pleasure to see you. And again, thank you for continuing to be the voice of reason down in Washington with your bipartisan approaches and really looking out for all Granite Staters, including all Hilltoppers in our smallest city in the state of New Hampshire, 10 square miles, and our population 11,700. And as my colleague here, Tom Holmes, will also be able to chime in. Municipal government and town governments were the last reign on that ladder. is that there is nowhere else for us to look, is that literally when things land on our desk, we have nowhere else to turn. And that is why it is so critical right now that the conversations that are occurring and what you are advocating for come to fruition. Because the shortfalls are going to equal very, very tough decisions that are going to affect all citizens. All of us have been moving through this pandemic together, hand in hand. But suddenly, when the shortfalls start occurring, it's where the direct services are going to be cut because we have no other decisions then to make. That means it's going to affect the students that are already affected by a brand new approach to education and trying to navigate through that pandemic, their learning. That means the frontline workers who have been battling this, the first responders. We will have to start looking at whether or not we can afford our members of our police departments, our members of our fire departments, our EMT services. All of these critical services which have kept us safe could suddenly be eliminated. And that's why funding to local, town, and municipal governments is going to be so critical. This is the way that we are going to get ourselves continuing to step forward. This is the way that we will resolve these problems. Without that funding, unfortunately, it's going to be a vortex of equaling even more problems throughout the local municipal governments and townships. Particularly here in Somersworth, the last 7 years, this community has experienced a tremendous amount of growth. And we are finally on our footstep once again towards our historic success, which we were able to really live through like all the other major industrial cities, Manchester, Dover, and Rochester during the height of the Industrial Revolution, and then kind of lost our way after the mills closed up. Well, we're excited because we're finally back on our way. Well, now we're afraid that we're going to get stopped dead on our trails and not be able to continue to advance. So continue that fight, continue to reach across that aisle, Congressman, because it is going to be so critical that the cities and towns get this money, or we literally will be the next victim of this pandemic. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Tom Holmes there from the fine other area, the Lakes region.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman, for allowing us to have a voice in your deliberations. And thank you for allowing me to speak for New Hampshire towns, smaller towns and tourist towns and so forth, which are vital to New Hampshire and part of its character. If the past is prologue, things are going to continue to change very quickly, and the protocols that we put in place on a Monday will often be obsolete by Friday. Information came in so quickly in pandemic part 1, we had trouble keeping up with it, and it was impossible to review it all. And we learned at the time that government is ill-equipped to recently. After all, they call them deliberative sessions for a reason. They're slow and deliberate, and we don't want a government that's going to act rashly or programs. But when a situation like this, unprecedented pandemic occurs, we need to react rapidly. We need to be on a dime, and we're going to need a lot of dimes to be able to deal with this. So right now, what's occurring in Conway, we have a tourist area, as you know, we're being overrun. We anticipated all of our popular areas are being overrun and overpopulated, and it has created costs to my community in regards to sanitation facilities. We had to double them. Over trash pickup, we had to double that. Cleaning of those facilities, we had to double that. We've had to hire people for our summer rec program that are medical technicians to take temperatures and so on and so forth. We've had to authorize overtime for everything from Parks and Rec to town clerk's office. We are seeing a lot of people change their residency and changing their New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut plates to local plates because they want to become residents here so they'll have a place to stay if this happens again or if you have another shutdown. We are seeing that the people who are visiting us right now are a little more unruly than they were in the past. Being a Navy veteran, I think I know the reason. It's as if they were out at sea for a long time and now all of a sudden they're in port and they're blowing off steam, but it's created some local fear, which is translating into anger and road rage incidents and so forth. But I think if we are empathetic to each other, we'll get through that as well. There's the usual complaints and issues about social distancing and not wearing masks and so forth. It's created an extra impact on our health department. And we're having trouble keeping up with the emergency response calls. There's a lot of injuries down in the Kank and in the woods and so forth. We've had fires from people camping out in places where they don't usually camp out. And we just had a lot of unanticipated expenses. And I would reiterate my colleagues saying that if we are allowed the direct funding, then we will have the flexibility, us in the trenches, to be able to put those resources where they are most needed quicker than a state level or a federal level permission of FEMA thing and so forth. So all eyes right now, luckily, our property tax revenues were only 2% off on the spring bill from the year before. There was a real concern about our operating financials and whether we'd be able to meet our obligations to schools and counties and so forth. But we managed to get through the spring tax billing season, and we didn't have to borrow a huge amount of money to do it. But there's another shoe to drop with this. We are already receiving requests for abatements, especially from the lodging industry, when numbers are way down and revenues are way off. And if we end up having to abate those property values that were set in Conway's case in 2019, that shrinking of the tax base is going to shift over to the resident property owners' shoulders. Their bills are going to go up whether we maintain budgets or even cut them because of the reduction in the property tax base in the retail, lodging, and restaurant sector. We would like to be able to not have that not happen by reducing tax rates. One of the steps that Conway took an unprecedented step of asking people to vote against certain warrant articles so we wouldn't have to raise and appropriate that money, which gave us $1.3 million cushion to work with to keep the property tax rate level. But all eyes are on whether the state's going to meet its obligations for things like highway block grants and rooms and meals taxes and so forth. If we have a similar situation this time next year, and we are the Alamo being overrun by hordes of people from away, which is fine, and eventually that's going to be a good thing, but in the short term, it's creating a lot of extra expense and obligation. You don't have money to be reimbursed for these expenses. Those expenses are going to fall on the shoulders of the property taxpayers as well. And this will be at a time when a lot of them are still out of work, a lot of businesses have closed, a lot of businesses like JCPenney have gone bankrupt, and it'll be when they can least afford to pay increased property taxes. So we would like to see some funding and some ability to use that funding to offset these unprecedented costs and make sure that the taxpayers are not impacted. And we all don't want to contribute to a shutdown of the economy because of a lack of resources to be able to deal with whatever it is that's going to come up. We just don't know. Again, I'd like to say that they're facing similar situations. They have to relearn their entire technique of teaching our children. And that's going to ripple through to parenting, where working mothers are going to have to deal with maybe having kids home a couple of days a week. It's a 2-day on, 3-day the other way around, and all the other things that go along with that. I have employees who are dealing with elderly parents who are diabetic themselves or who have young children, and they cannot come to work as often as they used to be able to, and I have them working from home in some cases. It's you have to be able to play jazz, not classical. You have to be able to improvise in this situation. And in order to improvise, we're going to need the tools, times to do it. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for giving us a voice.
No, Tom, we appreciate you joining us, and thanks for sharing your local perspective, especially as it pertains to a community that is so tied to our travel and tourism economy in New Hampshire. And we know that future is so uncertain, for our restaurants and lodging establishments. And anyone who's in the travel and tourism economy, it's a very mixed picture in the coming months and even for the next few years. And as your local revenue is so tied to the fate of that economy, it's really important we provide you the support you need. So I really appreciate everyone's comments. I think there certainly were some common strands here. We need to make sure the next package provides significant support for state and local government, that those dollars are flexible to deal with the lost revenue that you all are experiencing, and that you also have funding to deal with the increased costs to continue to keep workers and the general public safe and do everything we can to confront this virus and make sure New Hampshire moves in the right direction. So thank you for your work and for sharing your perspectives. I know we have a number of folks from the media who are on the line here today, so maybe we can throw it open to anyone who has questions.
Just go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is Holly Raymer from the Associated Press. Is there a certain way you would like to see funding for towns and cities and counties distributed? What would be the sort of ideal scenario?
Well, thanks for the question. And I think the formula that was included in the HEROES Act that was passed in May gets it right and has a right balance between state, county, and local government. And as I mentioned, there's no sort of threshold for population for the size of a government entity to receive support. I think our smaller communities are hurting just as much, if not more, than some of our biggest cities are. So we've got to understand that experience and I think provide some equity. And I think the formula that we approved in the HEROES Act to do that in consultation with the Association of Counties and the U.S. Conference of Mayors strikes the right balance. So that would provide $1.5 billion for our counties and communities in New Hampshire. And I think that would go a long way to allow them to deal with the curveball that this pandemic has thrown them.
I've got a couple. This is Damon from the Conway Sun.
Hi, Damon, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. One thing I keep hearing about other rounds of funding was that the funding went to fat cats and not necessarily the people who need it. And so how are you going to make sure that the funding is going to go in the right spot? And then the other question I had is, one of my buddies is a financial wizard, and he was very worried about inflation from all the money printing. I was wondering if you could address that.
Well, thanks for the question, Damon. I think we see inflation at a very low point right now. And I think we've got to continue to take significant action that's going to help throw a financial lifeline to our families and communities. And the Federal Reserve Chair has indicated that action is appropriate, that he's counting on Congress to do that. And so that's why I think we need to act as quickly as we can in a bipartisan way to approve this additional support. In terms of the funding going where it needs to go, I think you heard stories today about just how great the need is out there. I know there's been a lot of talk about some of the small business programs and those who might have been first in line to get that help. Some big outfits that were publicly traded companies that perhaps weren't experiencing the financial pain that other smaller businesses were. And so I do think that it's time for a second round of the Paycheck Protection Program, and that support should be targeted to those that are actually losing revenue, and that are our smallest businesses, our mom and pop businesses, our Main Street businesses that really define the culture of our state of New Hampshire and drive our economy. So that's where the help should go. And clearly we need oversight along the way so that we can make course corrections and identify those areas where either people might be taking advantage of funding that's been distributed or find out ways that it's not getting to the right place. It should absolutely be targeted and go to those who need the help the most. Do you have something else, Damon?
Yeah, I could probably think of something. What was it? I think it was a county person that I was in a meeting with who said, well, hey, we might end up ahead of the game. And I keep hearing that from people saying, oh, the $600 and the paycheck protection or whatever it was, will put people ahead of the game, and they're buying jet skis and they're not saving it for a rainy day. And the county got all kinds of money, and Tom Holmes has got an authorization for what, $600 and something thousand. Is there any possibility we'll end up ahead of the game? With all this aid, I don't think that's likely, but you never know.
Well, I think there's a lot of unpredictability, and the steps we took in the CARES Act, passed near unanimously through Congress, President signed it, were significant and provided significant support for our workers who are out of work through no fault of their own, through our states that were experiencing hard times and increased costs, and to our local businesses that had been forced to close or seeing a fraction of their normal revenues. So those steps were extraordinary, and I think we have to continue to refine and recalibrate them over time. Tom Holmes, I don't know if you have anything to add to that in terms of Damon's question about.
I would only hope that if Damon knows where that $600,000 is, he would bring it with him in the next selectmen's meeting, because I don't have it. Our allotment is 200,000 based on Conway population, and whenever they base something on population, towns like Conway do get shorted a bit because we're virtually a town of 20,000 people, given all the second homeowners and the tourists. 45% of our tax bills go to out of valley zip codes. And so when they base it on year-round population, the amount of aid we get to deal with twice as much people as what they think they're giving us is often a problem. But to date, we've managed to do it. And we get, I think our allotment was $240,000. Thank you, Damon.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. I just didn't have the figure off the top of my head.
Not a problem.
And Damon, this is Dana Hilliard, Mayor of the City of Somersworth. I think as Tom would agree, towns and cities don't ever get ahead. What we're able to do is we're able to then finally focus on projects that we have had to put off for decades to ensure that our books are balanced. So there is a constant weighing in of what the critical need is and what we have to do, not really what we would like to do. It is a constant push off at the municipal and town level, and us just doing the balance of the critical services that we need to give all the time, and shorting ourselves every single municipal site, every single budget cycle.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Kim Houghton with the Union Leader. I'm not sure who the best person is to address this question, but I wonder if anyone could tell me if they know already of any communities in New Hampshire that have already cut services, specifically, personnel for police or fire because of financial complications already with COVID. And also, if anyone could address, which communities in New Hampshire, although I'm sure everyone is suffering at some point, but are any communities in more dire straits than others?
I don't know if any of our county and local experts want to answer that one.
This is Commissioner Pappas. I can say that in several of the counties, including mine, we have put a hiring freeze, and we are at the limit of our budget right now to pay salaries for the workers that we have, and all of them are on the front lines. This would be nursing home workers and corrections officers, and also county attorneys. So we're feeling the pinch in our salaries and in our supportive staff.
In Conway, we also, like I believe I mentioned, I asked the voters to vote against about 5 warrant articles to save us about $1.3 million. They were things like, in addition to our town garage, our revolving acquiring of police vehicles every couple of years and so forth, things that we knew we could put off a year. The ironic thing is, as essential personnel, we found ourselves never busier than during this pandemic and could ill afford a reduction in staff. Besides, pointed out to a local property owner, doesn't lower the property taxes right away. If the budget is passed, we have to raise and appropriate that money in the budget, whether we spend it or not. See, and it wasn't until later in one of the governor's orders where it's allowing certain select people to retroactively cut a budget. But at the time, we addressed it through the warrant article process, and just the voters, God bless them, they did exactly ask, and they voted 5 warrant articles. And I didn't have to twist arms really, but they got the message and they voted down the right ones and not the critical ones. So that's how we dealt with it. And as I said, I'm authorizing overtime. I'm not cutting staff. I'm hiring people because we can't. And that's one of the ironic things about the shutdown. It turns out it's a lot more work to deal with people outside at their car or online phone and email than it is to just walk up to a counter and hand people your automobile registration papers. And so, a lot of my staff is losing weight for all the extra steps they're having to take running in and out of the building. We have a limited access to the public right now. We're closed to the public for months, and we're adapting. We're adapting as best we can. But again, it's more difficult to adapt if you don't have funding.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
So it looks like we have a question in the chat from Andrew from Manchester Inklink. Question: municipal aid in the CARES Act, I believe, went to towns through the state, excluding cities larger than 500,000. Is what you're saying here that you are hoping to direct grant funding for municipalities moving forward, or would you support a plan that sees the state as the gatekeeper again? And to clarify, if negotiations in Congress require using the state as a gatekeeper as a compromise. It's in the chat too, if anybody wants to read it there.
Sure. Well, I think clearly that no one knows how to spend these dollars best in terms of the response efforts and providing vital services than our counties, cities, towns, and states. And I think there should be a piece of the pie for all of our state and local government entities. That's what was provided in the HEROES Act. That's what needs to be in this next coronavirus relief legislation. That's what we'll be fighting for these next few days. So I do think that the state can get its share to deal with lost revenue and increased costs and all the other vital services the state's providing, but that our counties, cities, and towns should receive direct aid. I think that's the fair and equitable way to handle this. It also makes sure that the support will directly get out as quickly and efficiently as possible to our decision makers and our local leaders.
Yeah, I got one more. Maybe this would be for Tony Pappas. What about keeping prisoners locked up and not infested with coronavirus? I heard that's been a big concern, especially in Carroll County, where we had one inmate who was, protesting basically that he was at a special danger of getting coronavirus.
Well, actually, our jail population is way, way down because of the bail reform. And we have not had any problems with coronavirus in our jail. We had one corrections officer that tested positive and quarantined, and that was it. Our inmates are not quarantined, but basically remaining in their cells, social distancing. All of our corrections officers are wearing masks and protective gear, and we are very, very involved in keeping the jail sanitized. So for us and for many of the jails that I'm familiar with, it's simply not a problem. And I'm really proud of the work that's been done to prevent the virus from impacting our inmates and our staff. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think that the case you're speaking of might have been an isolated case.
Looks like we've got another question.
That works.
Oh, great. We've got another question from Tyler from WMUR. A report out last week from the Department of the Treasury Office of Inspector General says New Hampshire has only spent 34% of its coronavirus relief funding so far. Congressman, what's your reaction to that? And also, what is your priority for whatever is passed next? Is it more funding, or is it more flexibility to spend the funds the state already has?
Well, I think we need a little bit of both. And New Hampshire has allocated most of its CARES Act funding. I think that the governor has made many different announcements at his state briefings about how those funds have been allocated, going to things like hospitals, local businesses, nonprofit organizations, communities that need assistance. And so of the $1.25 billion, I'd have to check the figures and see how much of that has been allocated, but I believe most of those dollars have been allocated, are going to soon be spent. And clearly, when we first passed the CARES Act, there wasn't really a sense of the duration of this pandemic, the depth of the economic crisis that would result, and the dislocation for state and local government. So now we're getting a much clearer picture of that, and I think we have to redouble our efforts. So I think that the legislation we're talking about is really appropriate at this juncture, given the pressure that are on our state and local budgets. What we can't afford to see have happen is a disruption of the great work that's been going on in New Hampshire to address this virus, which have kept numbers low, or a disruption to vital services like public health, law enforcement, education, healthcare. We've got to make sure that all those services can continue without the pressure of budget cuts or without the potential of downshifting of costs to local taxpayers. So that's what we can get accomplished in this next act. And I'm confident that members of both sides of the aisle are hearing this message from their district as loudly and clearly as I'm hearing it from people all across New Hampshire. So with that, I think we can, really push forward a bipartisan package that makes these necessary investments.
Well, this is Colin Gately from Congressman Pappas's office again. We are running up against a hard stop here. So just wanted to, Congressman, if you wanted to say any final thoughts, and if reporters didn't get to ask a question, please reach out to me, Colin Gately, or Kristen Morris, and we can follow up for you. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I want to thank our panelists, our state and local officials who joined us here today. Thank you for your work. And I do hope everyone stays safe. Please be in touch with our office if there's any assistance we can provide or any additional information you want to give us. And just let us know how we can help. And we're going to stay committed to this mission of trying to find ways to support you all in the tough work you have ahead. So thanks for the work that you do, and I hope you all stay safe.